Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. For those of you that like to get to the juicy story where you have the straightforward Bigfoot encounter, well, I've got that for you on this channel right now. But the full stories are really worth listening to, and I've got them listed at the bottom, because really, just the Bigfoot encounter without the whole experience from the beginning to the middle and the end is really worth listening to. But if you just want to get to the juicy encounter that people have sent in to me, by all means, here are a few examples of them right now on my channel. So get straight into the business, shall we? And let's get started.
Even before I approached the grazing field, I could sense a menacing presence that literally sent chills down my spine and made my blood turn incredibly cold. I knew immediately that my gut was right and that something indeed was very, very wrong, and I felt it in every single fibre of my being. I could hear the frightened moos of my cows, and by the way they were thundering around that meadow made me alarmingly aware that they were definitely in the presence of a predator and were very, very unsettled. I immediately cocked my rifle and crept behind a tree, and that was when I saw 3 hairless, blue-grey dog-like creatures with strange claws trying to take down this little calf by clamming down the throat area of the creature with their sharp teeth. I immediately wasted no time in firing several warning rounds and watched those dog-like hairy creatures run like lightning towards the woods. Suddenly I sensed that something else was also watching me from the woods, and my eyes immediately noticed a very large humanoid form with glowing red eyes staring at me and then disappearing suddenly into the woods very fast. It looked remarkably like the ghostly shadowy form I had seen growing up as a girl. Now I was not sure that it was a ghost at all, but what was it? I could not even begin to imagine. The next evening I decided to put a huge bucket of pig's blood into my outhouse to see whether I could trap one of those chupacabras, if they were indeed bloodsuckers, as I believed they were. I surmised that they would be drawn to the smell of that blood, and I was right. I am so glad to say that my plan worked utterly brilliantly. Within 2 hours of laying down my trap, I was able to slam the door behind these 2 dog-like creatures and lock them in. I immediately called my husband, and he was stunned by the strange hairless creatures that were desperately trying to escape. They were scratching away, banging the wooden panels, and making the most strange bird-like calls that I've ever heard, and they also growled continuously. My husband had never seen anything like them in his entire life, and he was utterly amazed that these creatures were indeed chupacabras. My husband went indoors to phone a friend of his for advice to discuss the strange creatures that we had actually trapped and what we should do about them now that we had them in our hands. Suddenly I heard this huge crashing and banging sound coming from the outhouse, and I ran outside as fast as I could, and I was not prepared by what I saw. There was this monstrous, huge, giant, hairy humanoid breaking open some of the wooden panels of my outhouse and letting out the chupacabras out of their traps. I was stunned by what I was seeing because it happened so very fast. I watched these incredibly fast grey-moving shapes scurry through the opening and race past me so very quickly, bolting away, that so fast that I barely saw them. They ran towards the woods, and then they suddenly disappeared. The huge, hairy, humanoid ape-like creature turned around, and he suddenly saw me staring at him with a growing look of horror on my face. I think he was as astonished to see me as I was to see him. What on earth was this strange creature, I wondered. I was so terrified that my whole body literally froze in terror. The creature was so human-like in his appearance, but he also reminded me a lot like an ape. It was almost like he possessed an amalgamation of both humanoid and ape-like attributes, if that makes any sense at all. He was standing yards away from me, and next to him I felt pathetically fragile, small and tiny. This hairy humanoid was covered from head to toe with long matted, thick black hair that was growing grey in various areas, giving me the impression that the creature was not so young. He was like a 9-foot giant, and he must have weighed about 900 pounds, and his shoulders were monstrously huge, and so were his long arms that literally hung below his knees. In short, the creature was gargantuan. It had a very distinct bullet-shaped head, with a very long face, flat nose and slender mouth, as well as brown eyes with a red twinkling eyeshine that was noticeable in the darkness. I was lucky to see the creature clearly because it was a very dark evening, but the light of the outhouse enabled me to see him in excellent visibility. It was really strange because although the creature was terrifying and made my knees buckle when he looked at me, I have to say that he was more friendly than aggressive towards me. For a moment he held my gaze and moved towards me. I was about to scream in terror, but the hairy hand placed a large eagle feather in my hand that I noticed he had previously had tucked behind his left ear. He made an excited chattering sound to me, as if he was talking to me directly. I really got the distinct impression that he was thrilled to see me, as if I was a long-lost friend that he remembered. Then he walked away, swinging his arms backwards and forwards, and he even turned around a couple of times to look back at me with warm, friendly eyes. I saw him disappearing into the woods, and then two figures of those chupacabras came running out of the woods to greet him, like two devoted, loving dogs who were utterly thrilled to see their master. Then I saw him, a creature the likes of such that I have never seen before in my life. This colossal creature was quite literally Herculean in size. He was majestic, lofty, powerful, and imposing. This extraordinary ape-like humanoid towered at about 10 feet off the ground, but it was his girth that impressed me the most, because he was about 5 feet wide, was thick, brawny, and muscular. His whole body, from head to toe, was covered in waves of thick, long, lustrous black hair, and his arms were so long they could almost touch his ankles without bending over. I was amazed to observe that the shoulders on this creature were humongous, as they supported a very large cone-shaped head. I was fascinated to see that his long face seemed to possess a combination of human and ape-like influences, with a very deep-set pair of treacle-brown eyes and a very prominent brow ridge, slender mouth, and flat nose. I was fortunate to see the detail of this creature so clearly under the light of the lanterns and the enchanting candlelight. I truly should have been trembling in my boots in an act of unadulterated terror, as most people invariably would have been. However, I was so astounded and aghast by what I was actually seeing, and so impressed by the creature's magnificence, that for a while it would seem that my terror and fear were momentarily suppressed by my complete awe and approbation for this remarkable, awesome creature. Yet I assure you, I was in absolutely no doubt that this creature was highly dangerous and exceedingly formidable, and like any apex predator, demanded respect, and to fear him would be the wisest course of action you could make. The creature seemed surprised to see all 6 of these cloaked women bowing down before him, believing him to be some kind of a god who had responded to their offerings. I believe for this hairy humanoid, seeing these women like this in such a passive, submissive role, made him feel quite smugly satisfied, and also pleased that he wasn't actually being challenged. He proceeded to make a few grunting sounds, and then he started pounding his chest as if to say, "I'm glad you acknowledge my superiority and magnificence over you." Truly, he seemed so pleased by the bended knees and the lowered heads. Suddenly he perceived all the offerings lying at the base of the oak tree. He took the flowers and disposed of them across the forest floor with incredibly little interest in them, as if their delicate beauty had all but escaped him. When he saw the huge bowls of fruit and nuts, he allowed the huge, powerful, testosterone-driven male bravado to slip away, and he quite suddenly became like a naughty, mischievous monkey who could not wait to dive into the goodies. Even I was smiling as I saw this complete transformation in the creature's personality that quite literally went from dominance to childlike whimsical exuberance in a matter of seconds. Judging by the sheer delight on his face, you would have thought all his Christmases had come at once. He quite literally looked thrilled and ecstatic, and eagerly popped a couple of juicy strawberries into his mouth, making an appreciative oohing and ahhing sound, as he proceeded to carry the large bowls of fruit away. I watched in stupefied awe as he glided back into the woods on his long, agile legs, and then I could hear him whistling all the way. He was one big, happy bundle of hair. That's all I can say. Once the creature had actually gone, all 6 women were weeping, including my aunt. I realised suddenly that they were crying tears of joy. "The gods answered us!" cried my Aunt Selina in delight. "The gods answered us! Isn't this the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to you?" The creature sat up and looked around with a concerned look in its deep-set brown eyes, and bounced up immediately on its long, agile legs, fixing a steely gaze upon me. I could see by his pained expression on his leathery brown face that he was not at all happy that I had observed him like this, and that he had been caught off guard. I stood there in terror regarding this creature, in utter horror. I promise you, being close to a creature as imposing and as powerful as this thing was like being in a tiger's den. You pretty much think you're already living on borrowed time, and that death is imminent. In that moment I did not know whether to run or to stand still. I have never been more afraid in my entire life, and my legs were shaking violently beneath me, and my heart was thundering through my chest at 100 miles an hour. The creature looked at me, curled back his mouth, exposing his glistening white, pearly teeth, and made a strange, audible, growling sound that sounded very menacing, like an aggressive Rottweiler dog. And then he gave me 1 or 2 more glances with his brown eyes, and ran off on his long, hairy legs with the most incredible agility and grace. I was so relieved to see the creature go, but I could not believe what my eyes had physically seen. This creature must have been about 7 to 8 feet tall, 500 to 600 pounds, and covered with long, lustrous black hair, and it was rather matted, but it had a face that was just like that of an ape, but also human influences in it, and a very distinctive, very crinkled brow ridge, a dark, flat nose, and a typical ape-like mouth. I ran back to my mother as fast as I could to tell her what I'd seen. "Mum, there's an ape man in the woods, and he was rolling on the ground just like a dog. There was an ape in the woods, Mum, and he was like a dog rolling in the ground." "Lisa, what's wrong with you?" my mother shrieked. "Stop making up these crazy stories. There are no apes in America, for goodness sake. Why do you insist on trying to scare your poor mother? It's amazing that I've not had a cardiac arrest with all the comings and goings lately." I was sad that I could not share my amazing encounter with the ape-like humanoid that I'd met in the woods, because no one believed my story, and even my own brother, who knows I do not lie, just refused to believe me, and told me that after my encounter with the ghost, I was now seeing things and manifesting them in my imagination, which definitely was not the case. I know what I saw in those woods, and it was a hairy, ape-like humanoid.
So there we are. That's the juicy bits of our stories tonight. I personally think you should go back and listen to the whole story because it makes it so much more exciting, because then you learn all about where it happened, the location, and all about the fabulous characters involved in the story. And that makes the story so much more gripping. But as I say, so go down to the description and then click on to the YouTube link, and then you will hear the whole story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.